Lisa Bonet. Bonet. Oh, big O. You know how you've been saying something wrong all fucking day?
That's
I'm
all
I'm
right.
trying to change it.
You can do it.
I know.
Believe in you.
I know. All right, ready whenever you are. Hey, everybody, what's up? It's your boy MJ, and welcome to the Black Wine Guy Experience. My guest today is one of the most influential and widely read American voices on wine and food and managing editor of RESY. Please welcome acclaimed journalist and author, Jon Bonne.
Hey.
In Jon's 20-plus years as a journalist, he has been a senior contributing editor for Punch, spent nearly a decade as the wine editor and chief wine critic of the San Francisco Chronicle, where he co-edited its food and wine section and won not one but 2 James Beard Awards and numerous other accolades. He is also the author of The New California Wine and The New Wine Rules, and is currently finishing his next book, The New French Wine. Welcome, Jon.
Thank you so much.
Tell us about the wines we're going to be drinking tonight.
Sure. My favorite part. So 2 wines. The first one, which you're tasting right now, and by tasting I mean drinking.
Yes.
Is Muscadet. And this is Domaine de la Pépinière, which is one of the best biodynamic properties in Muscadet, and I think really one of the pioneers in the quality revolution that's going on there. This is their 2017 Monnier Saint-Fiacre, which is one of the 10 crus that have been approved in Beaujolais. So in Muscadet. So exactly like in Beaujolais, where there's 10 crus, there's now 10 crus in Muscadet. They were done a little bit more precisely, much more around the geology, and they are all very specific in terms of their soil type. They're all long aged. This receives 3 years of aging on lees before it's released. So I think this is actually current release. And to me, this is the step after white Burgundy. This is the next great white wine.
Oh, wow. Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah. And then the second is 2018 Planquette. This is Bordeaux. This is from the Medoc, actually. A guy named Didier Michaud, this was actually his last vintage. He sort of turned over the property to a young couple who were kind of continuing in organics and whatever. Tiny, maybe 3 hectares, all the way down on the estuary, like near the mouth of the Atlantic. And I have a irrational obsession with small scale Bordeaux. I kind of, got past my Bordeaux hating phase and realized that I grew up with like drinking red Bordeaux. I love it. And when you get past kind of all the, like ridiculous douchey parts of Bordeaux, there's extraordinary wine there. It's still the biggest fine wine region in France, and so you find these tiny little farms where they're producing super interesting wines.
Love it. I love that. The douchey parts. It's we'll get into that.
There's no shortage in Bordeaux.
No, I've read an article you talked about. Yeah, it was so funny. So let's start at the beginning. You are born and raised a New Yorker, right? Grew up in the city and then Westchester, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, where in the city did you live, and how old were you when you moved out to Westchester?
I was like, sort of getting to elementary school when we moved. I grew up on the Upper West Side, right by Central Park West, literally across from the Hayden Planetarium for a few years. We could wake up and watch all the floats for the Macy's parade, preparing at like 4:30 in the morning. The Upper West Side at that point was not the Upper West Side as it is now,
right?
So it wasn't quite as posh, but yeah. And then we moved up to Westchester, and then I came back here for school.
Yeah, did it start getting posh when Lennon moved up there, or was you? I mean, as a New Yorker.
I mean, it depends how you measure it. I'd say it started let's put a pin in like when the first Starbucks opened in '94, down the block from where I was living, like right after college. And at that point, it was like a big deal. New York was getting its first Starbucks,
right?
And that was either the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning.
And that, it's so funny, and that's a big deal because. Coffee wars, like they were coming into Dunkin's territory. They're taking the East. They came to take the East.
And chock full of nuts.
Yeah.
Back when that
Yeah.
I guess it still exists. Like you can still buy Chock-full of Nuts coffee, but there were actual like coffee places once upon a
I
time.
don't know if I knew Chock-full Nuts had coffee shops.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Now I'm like truly dating myself.
Well, no, I didn't grow up in the city, so I would know that, you know. And then you moved out to Westchester. Where'd your family relocate to Westchester?
We moved to Pound Ridge,
Okay.
which was definitely not as it is now. It was rural then, and but yeah, so we were there for a long time, and you know, it was the suburbs.
Yeah. It was like Green Acres. Like she loved the city. Like that literally just to go out to Westchester was like you're like in farmland.
Yeah,
You know?
things I will not forgive my mother for.
So I read that your father left a career in finance in the early 1980s to start a fine foods shop, and I guess that was like in the Pound Ridge area.
Yeah, so he had a really interesting career. He, he was, a corporate executive, went to Columbia Business School, and was actually a vice president at Citibank. And for his, midlife crisis, whatever it was, he had also trained as a chef. And he had studied a lot of cooking sort of early on, and so he decided he was going to, leave corporate America behind and go start a gourmet foods and catering business, which was interesting at the time. So, he had two real competitors at that point in sort of Westchester, Greenwich, New Canaan, kind of southern Connecticut. One was Abigail Kirsch, who's still, a big deal caterer. And the other was this woman who was like kind of an up-and-comer named Martha Stewart. So she obviously, I think, nailed it a little bit better than he did.
Yeah, because there's not the Bonne, dishes and linens and TV Empire.
Yeah,
and,
things I think, and like no hanging with Snoop.
No, I was like no collabs with
Yeah.
Snoop.
But yeah, so it was, and then eventually he went back to finance. But yeah, so it was an interesting environment to grow up in.
Is that kind of where your real interest in food and wine began?
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's it's tricky because everyone in this industry sort of like has their aha moment, and I don't have an aha moment. It was just there. I mean, like, I remember visiting Bordeaux when I was a kid. I remember visiting the Napa Valley and the Mondavi winery when I was a kid, but it wasn't like suddenly I woke up one day and this was it. And so like I, forgot all about it and went off and, lived my life, drank lots of bad tequila, and, didn't really get back into it until like I was living in Seattle and working for NBC, and suddenly was like really getting interested in food and wine, and was like, hey, boy, maybe I could write about this since that's kind of what I do, and suckered people in and have just been made the mirage last now for like 17 years.
So let's go back to the bad tequila. So tell me about your college years. You went to Columbia, right?
I did.
And you did. And did you study journalism at the journalism school? Or?
I didn't. I studied English and political science.
Okay.
And spent most of my time, working at the radio station doing news, the public radio station there, and drinking a lot of 40s because that's what you got up in Morningside Heights in the 90s.
Yeah.
And partaking of things that are now legal in New York.
Yeah.
And there was some bad tequila, regrettable bad tequila. I'm pretty sure that I traded a Don Henley cassette. Wow.
You just dated yourself.
Yeah. So,
a cassette for my listeners under the age of 30.
Yeah.
It's like a video. Oh, you know what
Yeah.
videotape is either.
Yeah. I'll be breaking my walker out now. So, so I'm pretty sure I traded that and probably other things for shots of tequila, objects.
Yes. Barter.
Yeah.
We didn't have Bitcoin. We had barter. We had cassettes, mixtapes.
The joyous days where the internet could.
The mixtape for the girl you like, or the breakup mixtape to try and get her back. So you said you worked at a radio station at Columbia.
I did.
Yeah. Now, Stretch and Bobbito still doing the hip hop show?
They totally were.
At the station there?
Yeah.
Yeah. So people don't realize like Columbia is a major player in the New York underground hip hop scene. Yeah. Yeah. There was these guys, Stretch Armstrong, I can't remember his real name right now, who went to Columbia, and then Bobbito went to Wesleyan, and they were running this, like, that's how people like Nas, everybody broke. Biggie, you broke on their show. You had to come on and freestyle, and it's a tiny little room too, right? Yeah.
Yes, it is.
And then you hear the stories. Like I watched like these documentaries, like Wu-Tang and everything. Like everybody's coming in, smoke. It's all smell like smoke there. But it's just very interesting that's a very powerful little radio station you worked at.
Yeah.
So what was your show about?
I was the news director. So
okay.
So we did a half hour of news, sort of New York focused, every night, and then my last year there, I actually sort of debuted their first like live talk radio show back when. Along with explaining cassettes, once upon a time there was radio, and people would be on it, and they would talk, and this was how the country went to hell. But before that, we did sort of news and public affairs.
Oh, very cool. So we earlier mentioned. So then you was the first job out in Seattle for MSNBC. What was the first job upon graduating?
No, my first job. So by that, by the time I graduated, I'd been doing radio, and reporting for basically 4 years. We'd covered the Democratic National Convention live. We'd done all sorts of stuff. I'd worked for AP. I'd worked for Newsweek. So. All of which was great, and then I got out of school and I took a job as a producer for a political consulting company.
Oh,
which was an interesting 6 months or so. But basically, like I would go to Alaska or Detroit or whatever and produce TV and radio ads.
Oh wow,
which is a strange job to have as a 21-year-old.
That's very interesting. Because you majored in political science, so. But I remember when Obama. His campaign, is that common? Is a lot of young people though work on campaigns
for sure? Because who else will take no money?
Oh, that's what I was getting at. Why is that?
Yeah. So after that, actually, I finished out that campaign season as a press secretary and issues director for a campaign in the congressional campaign in Connecticut. Pretty much along those lines, like who's cheap enough that they'll work for this. But I don't know. And then honestly, right after that, I fell haphazardly into doing internet work, and this was, again, breaking out the cane. This was 1995, so got in really, really early.
Yeah, that's like real internet. Not this super fast stuff you kids have nowadays.
Let's talk about dial-up.
Yeah, still like I didn't get my first email address to nice. I was like, this isn't gonna last, and I'd known about it for years, because when I was in law school, they gave us an email address. I'm like, I'm not using that shit.
Exactly. I remember what the horror was that AOL was going to open up its system so that its users could use a web browser, and everyone who was already doing internet stuff was like, here's the end of the internet. They're letting all the AOL people on. Little did we know. If you travel back in time and show them Instagram, show them Facebook, and be like, if you think it's bad now,
Yeah. No, it's meta now.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to have to hit you up, Zuck, for some sponsorship for that one.
As long as you do it in the metaverse.
Yeah.
Rainbow dolphins sailing by, whatever,
Oh, yeah, exactly. There's flying toaster screensavers, all that shit. You guys don't know nothing about laptops weighed 15 pounds. All right, so how'd you land as the lifestyle editor and wine columnist at MSNBC?
So like I said, I was doing internet stuff. I was actually employee number 12 at the first internet ad agency called agency.com, now long gone. And from there, I was missing journalism a lot, and so I took a job with News Corporation. Specifically at that point it was TV Guide, and then did some other stuff, and then went to Court TV where I was managing editor and relaunched their website.
What year was that?
That was 97.
Okay, so you missed the OJ trial.
I missed it. I got the OJ trial. No, I didn't get the OJ trial at Court TV. I got the aftermath.
Yeah.
But at that point, Johnny Cochran had a show. So that was fun. And then from there, I got hired at MSNBC.
I'm feeling old. I said Court. You said Court TV. Like I remember it vividly.
Before they started playing Homicide.
Yeah, exactly.
And then at MSNBC for a long time. So when I got there, I wasn't doing food and wine. I was doing, sort of general news, and then I was like the liaison between the NBC network desk and the .com side. And then just took a bunch of different jobs, was sort of the equivalent of the page one editor, covered, the environment, covered politics, I was a business reporter, I covered the airline industry for a couple of years. And in the course of that, like I said, I was, getting really interested in food and wine and, kept doing more stories like that, and then sort of created this strange beat that was the business and science of food and wine. And that's when I started the wine column. Everyone who ever gets a wine column has to figure out some way to sucker their editor.
That's what Eric Asimov said.
Yeah, exactly.
He had to like backdoor into it.
I got an idea.
Yeah.
And then I did that for a while, and then they looked at the metrics and they're like, yeah, that's cool, but so you're not going to be our celebrity news editor as well. So I didn't do the OJ trial, but I did do the Michael Jackson trial.
Oh yeah. I was actually in Santa Barbara for that.
Yeah.
And it was out in Santa Maria. I was I remember that vividly.
Yeah. And then ended up at the Chronicle.
Okay.
So all the magic happened.
You were out in I just got the PNW, right when like Washington wines and Oregon wines were starting to gain more recognition outside of the region.
Yeah.
So, did you used to visit any wineries while you were out there? I mean, what was that kind of?
I mean, that's sort of how it started. Was a little less Oregon, only because Oregon was farther along the curve, but. Yeah. Knew/know a lot of winemakers in Oregon, would go there all the time. But really it was Washington, and because this was sort of at it was kind of at the point of inflection where Washington wine was starting to become a thing, and so we would go out to the Yakima Valley, go out to Walla Walla a whole lot, and just kind of taste our way around, and slowly got to know the wine community there, and that was me being like, this whole wine thing, like, so I do this journalism gig, and I hang out with winemakers, and how do I put those together?
Yeah.
So it's and that was sort of the heyday for Washington really coming of age. I wish these days that there'd been a little bit more progress. I keep waiting. But yeah, it was sort of the perfect place to like see a wine region, and it's truly something not many people get to see, like to see a wine region actually sort of start to grow into its own.
Really cool. So let's jump into your writing, because like you said, you had to find a way. I forget who said it. Someone. James Altucher, who's this crazy guy. Idea sex, like you take this, you have this, and then you create something. So you have written about so many aspects of food and wine, and during the research I was reading a bunch of your pieces, and you're just so fucking real with it. So
like I said, definitely not the diplomat. Not, keep me far away from the United Nations.
Oh, that's so great. So we were warming up and we were talking, and Jon was talking about how he couldn't be a Somm because he's just going to tell it like it is.
Yeah, keep me away from any ambassador and keep me away from any table. It's like, so awesome. No good will come of that.
But here's an example for everybody, and you guys should really Google him and read a lot of his stuff. He's got books we'll talk about at the end. But in a story for Punch in 2018, the title was "Why is the Wine World So Unwoke?" And you talk about Anthony Bourdain's death had you reflecting on his work with No Reservations, and what you said was he tore into the safe space that food is supposed to occupy and found grubby politics and exploitation and abuses of power. And then you go on to write about how the wine industry is like that. And specifically, you said it's viewed by outsiders as a nice little escapist haven from the real world, has a nearly pathological aversion to its less than perfect side. Talk about that.
I don't know if that was prophetic in 2018 or if I just had
because
no,
it was before George Floyd, before Black Lives Matter, and those were kind of what brought a lot to the fore. People were saying, how unwoke wine is. How is that a thing? Is that what journalists do? They you just see the future, man?
If we're lucky, I'd say we very rarely do that. But, I mean, honestly, that piece just came out of me. I mean, reading everyone sort of have this visceral reaction to Tony's death, and I'm not big on putting my mourning out on Twitter and Instagram.
Sure,
It's just,
I know.
I get it. Everyone wants to find their photo and do their thing, but I'm just again, probably because of my work history. I'm if I'm writing an obit, I'm writing an obit, but I don't need to sort of write platitudes. But I was just sort of, I don't know, something sort of clicked, and I'm always kind of pissed off at the meta culture. Sorry, Mark Zuckerberg, of wine, where, I mean, there is the stuff itself is endlessly fascinating, and within the world of wine, you find people who have true and earnest and extraordinary reasons for doing what they do, and it's interesting because having spent all this time in California, and then going and spending all this time in France, you see this extreme dichotomy between the two cultures. And this isn't to sort of pick on one or the other, but, having written about California extensively, I think I had sort of not been, I mean, I was pissed off already at Napa and the wealth that's there, and the sort of the calculated attempts to create their own myths. But I don't think until I really was spending far too much time in little French villages with men and women who were, I mean, we're talking about people whose wines, you see them on big lists here in the city, and everyone thinks they're amazing, and you go to natural wine bars and this awesome, and you're just you actually go and you spend, and I'm not talking a week's vacation. I'm talking about, this was my third year, maybe fourth year of spending about half the year in France, where you're these people are broke. Yeah. And we can have all sorts of talks about what other whatever other inequalities there are in wine, but it's you literally go back to the people who are producing the wine, and even for all the fetishism that you see when you get here, meaning the United States, you go back to the origin. You're these folks are broke. They they've managed to get some land. Maybe it was family land. Maybe they bought it. But they're not sitting around broing down with each other. Well, I mean, they are because they're French, but
yeah, but it's not.
But
it's not the bro flex money.
Yeah, it's not I'm gonna drink some Alamon, man. Yeah, I mean, they're literally, they spend their time in shitty harvest vans, with holes in the floor, and trying to figure out where to buy clothes for their kids, how to pay their note to Credit Agricole. It's it is truly the substance of the work stripped down, which is why, again, you go out and you see the money that's behind a lot of sort of that penumbra, that luxury penumbra of wine. And for me, at least, it pissed me off. And so there's something about, I don't know, the Bourdain's death and me just this ambient sort of rage that's there about the fact that you look at how fetishized wine has become, and you realize how little trickles back to the people who are doing the work.
Yeah. I mean, it's yeah. I mean, it's people say, and I talked about this a couple episodes back. If you know people who were in Napa in the 70s, they'll tell you it's not the same place. And that whole industry is predicated on Mexican labor.
For sure.
It's predicated on, and we don't talk about that.
And it's interesting because in California, at least, I think people do understand that only because, no matter where you are in the ecosystem in California,
Yeah.
you do understand that this is how
Yeah.
literally the entire state runs.
Right.
But yeah, there's none of that gets transmitted on, and it's funny because it's hard for me to think of any industry that is as reliant on marketing as wine and simultaneously as bad at it.
Ooh. Mm.
Which is to say, it's the tropes that surround wine are. I mean, it's gotten a little better now, but even so, you're just like, you hear crap that comes out of people's mouths, and you're like, come on, like the actual story of really well-made wine should be compelling. And it's it's like this is not a hard thing, but then you realize how many people are in the industry for, I won't say nefarious, but like for very egoist reasons that when you actually strip down to the story that you should be telling, there's no there.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting now. I think we're starting to have this conversation in wine. I don't know that it's all directionally going to the right place. I think you still see you see a lot of indignation, but I don't know that it's necessarily always pointed in the right direction.
Right. Correct.
But where I was, my response sort of after writing the Unwoke piece, which, would that I could rewrite that headline now. But, we're like officially like, like in the vocabulary dustbin. But it is one of those things where it's like, look, there are lots of inequalities in the wine industry, which is to say the wine sales industry in the United States, in New York specifically. But for me, I go back to the origin point, and I'm like, just so we're clear, if you actually go to European France, like, there's no great glory here. I mean, Burgundy finally, like, they're making some money, but these were poor farmers for centuries since they basically somehow got land from the monks. And so, anyway, so it's going to be interesting because I think, certainly that wasn't the first piece to kind of throw the grenade, but I think it's fascinating to see how that conversation about the reality of wine and the true inequalities that are there, like 3-4 years, I think we're gonna have really interesting discussions about that.
Yeah.
Such as there's like wine media left at that point. It's all going to be bottle shots on Instagram.
Exactly.
Or we're all going to do like wine dances on TikTok.
Oh my God! And listen, so funny you said, like, that was my whole black wine. I think it started out making fun of influence. I just took bottle shots, like, for a year. And I was like,
we all still take bottle shots.
I mean, you do, but literally that I was like, what the hell is this? I was like, someone was like, yeah, there's a whole wine community on Instagram. I'm like, what is this? Like, people like, and I know Gary Vee says you got to use them all, but I just can't TikTok. It's just too much for me. Can't TikTok.
I also realized that I was going to have a finite potential as a wine influencer because I do not look good in a two-piece. And I don't think I would subject anyone to that.
That shit would probably go viral.
Yeah,
probably,
yeah.
You know. Wait a minute. It really. We should do our first TikTok together.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to go back to something you said earlier. You said that wine hasn't done a good job marketing itself. And in that same article, you said, candidly, we've done a really bad job in recent years explaining why our thing is special, why it matters, and why we spend late nights arguing about its esoterica. What's my proof? I have 2 words for you. White Claw. Boom. Let's talk about this seltzer shit.
Yeah,
I'm never going to get them for a sponsor.
Things I wrote shortly before my wife started selling wine spritzers.
I know,
right? No, I mean, and it was interesting because that was really sort of the first. I think that was the first summer when White Claw was
crushing.
Yeah,
it.
And my take from looking at the data was like, we, meaning wine people in general, sort of live in this very specific world, and we kind of, at that point, we're like, everyone was referencing each other, everyone wanted to like drink the cool shit, and
Right.
and I mean, there's still quite a lot of that, but it was like, it was literally this moment where you step back and you're like, okay, so we all have this, and we, this is our environment, and the market has literally moved on to drinking like malt liquor based seltzer.
I was like, did it move on or did it move back to Zima? I
Yeah.
fucking White Claw Zima. We didn't fall for that shit in the
Except
90s.
that White Claw's doing a whole lot better
I
than Zima.
know.
Like, if
I
Zima
know.
worked that well, we would all be like still holding those ridiculous
I
bottles.
know. That was a sexy bottle.
Yeah. So no, I mean and it's fascinating to see this the sustained market share for it, which is to say that like the fundamentals are that the people who are starting to drink now want something different, and and White Claw gave it to them, but whatever it is, I mean, you're seeing now that the very sort of form of of wines that are sort of marketed to people who would otherwise be drinking White Claw is starting to change. You're finally seeing labels starting to change, thank God. But it's
I know we have interactive wine labels now, and
yeah, but it's like, I mean, but it is again this tricky question of like, is that someone having fun? Do they like find their friend who's like a great illustrator, or is this did a marketing team come up with this?
yeah. I just poured and tasted this red you brought, and again, it's a small Bordeaux. It's killer, man. Woo.
I love these wines.
Wow.
Making everyone drink Merlot again.
Make Merlot great again.
Yeah.
MMGA. Oh shit! I got an idea to sell those hats.
But this is what I was saying about Bordeaux is like it's again like the wine community sort of tends to be an echo chamber, and forever people just wouldn't touch it, and it was fascinating to me in the sense that like I spent plenty of time railing against cult Cabernet, all of this, but at the same time, at some point I stepped back. And I swear, like, I thought Bordeaux was going to be like my, my throwaway chapter in the French book, and I ended up going back there 3 times to do reporting because I was just like, there's so much here, and the like again to my point of inequality and really sort of shortfalls in the wine industry. Like Bordeaux captures it because you're literally like, this is not metaphorical, inequality. This is literally like the word that one of the winemakers who's not in Pauillac used is it's feudal. It's literally like literally like not metaphorical, like the richest people in the world who are taking all the credit, taking all the glory, and screwing over the other 5,700 wineries that are there. And yet within all that, you still find there's all of these people who are doing extraordinary work. And candidly, in the end, like anyone can mock it, but there's a lot of people in the world who like drinking Cabernet and like drinking Merlot. And when Merlot was Merlot before Sideways, like it had issues, quality, sort of fell off a cliff, but there was a reason that people liked drinking it.
Oh, Merlot, when it's done right, it's
Yeah.
a beautiful one.
There's a reason that Petrus is still the most expensive Bordeaux.
Yeah.
So, it's, I don't know. That was, I can't teach me much, but that was my sort of, one great kind of return to form. I was like, this has legitimately been an oversight on my part. So now I drive everyone crazy and bring Bordeaux everywhere.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. I like what you said because you said feudal, and I think you mentioned that in a piece. I mean, that's basically like, oh man, John's got me talking about something we normally talk about. Basically, the Bordeaux classification system is like fucking redistricting for voting. You know, that's basically what it is. Like, that's what we do here. We do redistricting for votes. Back there, they're like...
Well, to be fair, if the redistricting worked like the 1855 classification, it would suck because it would never change, but at least it would never change. Centimillion is like modern gerrymandering where you just, redraw it so, you get one extra Grand Cru Class A, A.
Yeah.
And somebody sues and somebody sues again. And that is a damn good, if that analogy shows up somewhere, no one ever heard it.
You can have that one, man. Thanks for coming on, man. Like, take it.
But yeah, no, and you see it. It's literally, rich grown men fighting over this ridiculous bullshit. Like, who, and your wine is your wine, and it's interesting. So the 2022 classification, Ausone and Cheval Blanc tapped out of it because they were like, reading between the lines, they were basically like, we are who we are, and we've put a lot of hard work into what we do.
They really should not worry about it.
Well, right, but they're like, we literally, like, why are we being judged on our Instagram accounts? Like, the classification for 2022, part of it is like your marketing and social media.
Shut the front door.
Right, and
what
you're
the
like,
fuck?
and whatever my other issues.
Although there's an opportunity for me as a social media expert. So
all you need to do is buy land and send him.
I just need to go. I'm like, hey, I'm here to help.
Just Kickstarter it.
Exactly. That's interesting, man. Your book's gonna be incredible. They're literally taking that into account.
Yeah.
And then also, like you said, it's Roman. Like, which was the chateau that sued and finally got classified in '71? Like, it took them to they won. Yeah.
Mouton,
right?
Yeah. And what's interesting is the hubris that is required for that to have happened. And it was interesting to dig back into sort of the appellation system and process at that point. But you think about it's funny because today they pride themselves in the story that second they can't be and first they shan't be, and it's like, what the hell are you? Where did you wake up in the morning? You're just, again, you're like, you want to talk about privilege, like, what kind of privilege is required to literally think that somehow you have been denied this thing from the 1855 classification, which was basically a marketing gimmick to begin with? It was literally done for the Exposition Universelle, and they wanted to have sort of a ranking to, like, impress all the visitors. And somehow this insane, like, marketing stunt is now with us, 170 years later.
Yeah, God bless Bob Parker. He saw an opportunity. Like, in America, we score everything. Like, if you go to school here, you take tests. We're used to scores, right? Like, it's like,
I give it 4 stars.
Yeah, exactly.
On Amazon, I didn't like the color of the cover.
Oh my God, I love reading like the 1-star review. It's like the most bullshit thing most of the time. It has nothing to do with the product. It's amazing. Like, I remember when I was like, what? I forgot what I was like, but it was like, it has nothing to do with the product. Like, it was like they didn't like the color. Like, they shipped me the wrong color, 1 star. What the hell?
I couldn't get the CD to work. I think literally there was like for the audiobook of one of my books, there was a 1 star that was like, I couldn't get the CD to work. I'm like, I'm truly sorry for your pain. Do you want me to come to your house? I could,
It's because they were trying to put the CD into the cassette player.
Grandma, you got to stop hanging out on Amazon.
So for like with Punch, like, how do you decide what you're gonna write about? Like, what's your process there? You just like it's something bubbling in the skin. You write about it, or just like what kind of do you go?
Yeah, I don't write tons and tons for Punch anymore. But yeah, it's basically sort of, I would throw 2 or 3 ideas out at my editor, and we'd sort of figure one, or we'd schedule them. A lot of it, candidly, Punch was until recently owned by Random House, and Random House is my publisher, and so this was also completely self-serving in doing a lot of the actual legwork for the book and getting paid twice for it.
Hey man, I'm not mad at you. I want to learn from you. Teach me.
To join the lucrative world of wine writing.
Exactly. All right, we're gonna take a quick break right there. It's a good point to take a pause. We'll be right back in just a second. Okay, we're back. So in your bio, I mentioned you've written two very popular books, The New California Wine and The New Wine Rules. The New California Wine book, the wine enthusiast wrote, it's a comprehensive look at the vanguard of personalities who are bucking what's expected and boldly redefining California's place in the wine world. So what gave you the idea for the book, and what was really the goal of that book?
So the idea for it came from, quite literally, it came from a piece that I wrote for Saveur called The New California Wine.
Okay.
And like any good author or, good writer, I was like, I should take my magazine article and turn it into a book.
I'll steal from myself.
Yeah. But to some extent, that piece also was a catalyst for me to really think about what I had been covering at the Chronicle. That was 2010.
Okay.
So I'd been there for about 4 years, and so it was, it was me taking a bit of a step back and seeing like I had written, a lot of pieces about what I was trying to find in California. Because when I got there, I was sort of skeptical of California wine. Not
because there was the big score seeking culture.
Right. So in the book, what I called it was big flavor, and that was the era of big flavor. And so that was not my thing. And suddenly I show up and I'm the wine critic at Northern California's largest newspaper. Totally not awkward. But I legitimately spent a couple years sort of saying, like, where do I find the wines in California that speak to me, that give me, a sense of what's happening here, that, that represent a sense of place, that sort of go back to the values that to me are really what make wine worth talking about in the first place. And so I started finding these things kind of haphazardly, and then wrote the Saveur article, and that allowed me to bring them together, and then realized that, there was this really a movement that was taking place, and all of these kind of contemporaneous winemakers who I knew were really working to take back California, and to some extent bring it back to where things had been in the 70s, to your point, when it was much more humble. The wines were, much, much different. It was, they were sort of, if you think about the great wines of the 70s, 60s, and 70s, they certainly had Europe as a template, but they also had sunshine, and they took it just far enough. And so suddenly it was like, well, here's this huge, this cohort of winemakers in California who all have a vision of kind of taking that and springboarding it forward, and not just going and doing what they did, but also thinking about new grapes, thinking about new places, really seeing kind of the great maturing of California wine beyond big flavor. And so that was the book, and it was, it was not, it was hard to write. All books are hard to write. But it was...
That's why I've written exactly zero. That's why
may I humbly suggest
99.99% of the world is written zero.
To never write about French wine, because if you think any other topic in wine is hard, except maybe Italy. Like, Italy's even more confusing. Ooh. Yeah. But so it was... it's interesting how much the book really did flow, and, I found sort of the vehicle for telling that story, and honestly, it's one that sort of will come back in the new French wine in terms of it being, a little bit travelogue, a good bit reference, somewhat thematic, but really kind of trying to place people there, because I think that's incredibly important in terms of being contextual. But yeah, so it was sort of it was capturing California at this very specific moment. And it's interesting now, because now all of these wines that I wrote about in the book are sort of, they're the lingua franca of, a subsequent generation that, like, doesn't know who Robert Parker was, doesn't really understand. They have a vague sense that, like, California wines used to not be like this, but these have now become the benchmarks. And yet, at the time that the book came out, there was this sense, well, this is all just fringe and nothing's going to change, and you're just writing about sort of these crackpots who who think they're gonna do something and they're not. I remember there was a otherwise kind of positive review, and I think the Minneapolis Star Tribune that said this is all and great, but we literally you can't find any of these wines in Minnesota.
Right.
6 months later, almost all of them were distributed.
Wow.
And I'm not going to say that had anything to do with the book, but it was simply that was the momentum at that point. And we're talking like 2013 for small distributors wherever to suddenly kind of pivot from the California wines that they felt that they'd had to work with to this new generation.
Right. Somebody said it was kind of funny. So you come down from Seattle to San Francisco, and you don't have a Napa Sonoma palate at that point.
Well, I actually came from New York. I got like a year back in New York.
Okay.
Because my girlfriend at the time had taken a job with Jim Cramer, actually, bizarrely, and so I for the second time managed to convince MSNBC to move me. So I moved back to New York. And we were
Kramer,
here
the wah that crazy guy.
Mad Money.
You Mad Money.
Yeah. But yeah.
Plot
So
thickens.
yeah. But then, so I'm back in New York. I'm trying to figure out what to do. And get a call from the Chronicle being like, you want to come do this? And this is a story I don't tell a lot, but, things that will definitely never happen to me or probably anyone else ever again. So I got a call from the Chronicle, and then I got a call from Food and Wine that was also like, we're looking for a new wine editor. Do you, Letty Teague was there at the time. She's like, do you have an interest? And so so I literally got 2 job offers within 2 hours of each other on the same day from the Chronicle and Food and Wine magazine.
His life doesn't suck.
Yeah, and inevitably, because I am a dumbass, decided to take the job all the way across the country for much less money in a failing industry.
Which you should have known because you were doing internet stuff.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I should definitely go from the internet to a newspaper. But, truly no complaints. The Chronicle was extraordinary. It was foundational for me in terms of my career. But I literally, one of my friends who's one of my oldest friends in journalism called me and was like, have you looked at the paper? Because there's no ads in here. So I don't know how you think they're going to pay your salary. I know it's Hearst, but even Hearst has limited patience for never making any money. And so, but to be perfectly fair, I knew at the time that working for the Chronicle, running the wine section there, having that platform would be truly important. What I didn't know is how much was going to start happening and had already probably started happening in California. Seemingly stupid decision, probably dumb luck, but it all worked out.
Yeah, no, and it really worked out, right? Because
this is the Bordeaux talking, by the way.
No. Well, so you were doing what's that called? Yeah, long distance relationship. That's a Bordeaux stopping my thinking. I was like, what is that? I don't remember. I used to do those.
Should we talk about the 2018 Bordeaux vintage and how ripe it was?
Oh my god!
This sucker's probably 15% alcohol.
It's 15, which is so funny. I was saying he says he doesn't like flavor, but this is bold.
Yeah.
I'm like, but you know what? Here's how you know it's Bordeaux. It's just got enough doo-doo, just enough funk over the fruit. So it's not just overripe, but it's just got that.
It's what I also like about this wine, which is here is this super cranky, organic, absolute misanthrope farming the sands of the lower Medoc. And, this is definitely cool kid stuff. And it's 15% Merlot, just so we're clear. Yeah. and I am here for it.
So, who were some of those winemakers that have become the new guard or have become the mentors to the new guard that you wrote about in that book?
Yeah. See, I successfully deflected you from talking about my relationship.
Don't worry, I'm gonna get there. He thinks he has, but I did go to law school. I'm gonna get you. I'm gonna back you into a corner just so you know.
Redirect.
Wait, I'm not like Denzel in Training Day. This shit is just not checkers. So like who I would have to say like Arnold Roberts.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, thinking about the people who are kind of major figures, Arnold Roberts, absolutely. And it's interesting because both of them had such a really deep kind of knowledge and informal education into the culture of that old California. Scholium Project, which is its
that
own
dude's
sui generis.
He's insane.
Yeah,
he's a nut, but in a good way.
But you want to talk about great copy. Who else? Literati. I mean, Ted Lemon is on the cover of the book, and Ted is sort of this wild. He's like the Gandalf. He's amazing. Tegan Passalacqua at Sandlands, who for sure, and Anna Turley, who I think is probably more than anyone the hero of that book, just because Tegan is such a ridiculously thoughtful view of the world, and just whenever you're thinking about something, he's like 20 steps ahead, and yet is able to do that in this remarkably humble way, with great sort of love and respect for the terroir that's there, even if it's like Contra Costa County and we're ducking the meth heads to go look at Zinfandel. Morgan Twain Peterson at Bedrock for sure, who it's interesting. I made Morgan and Tegan co-winemakers of the year the same year because they have this remarkably similar view about sort of the long history of California and the through line, and understanding the historic value of it. And then, obviously, Domaine de la Côte down in Santa Barbara, but also like a tribute to Grace, Angela Osborne. It's funny, Angela was one of those people who, she was an assistant winemaker for a winery up in Sonoma, and she
makes killer Grenache, man.
Right. So, but she was like, I didn't, who's this Kiwi girl's doing her thing. She puts a bottle of her wine in my hand, and it's everyone wants me to taste their wine. But so I was just like, okay, cool, thanks. Promptly, sort of forgot about it for 4 or 5 months, and then opened it, and I was like, holy shit. I was like, this woman is a genius. She is a maestro. And I was like, I get it. This is pure Grenache. It's whole cluster. She's got Chateau Rayas on the brain. I get it. Mm-hmm. And this was her 07, which was her first vintage, I think. And so reached out to her and whatever, wrote about it a number of times. And it's really interesting now. I'm insanely happy to see the attention that she's finally getting, because it's again, it's not Pinot Noir, it's not Cabernet, it's not a super easy story, but it was just one of those rare moments where I was like, maybe I actually am not so bad at this thing I'm doing, because I think this wine is insanely good and no one's telling me otherwise. And now you see she's finally getting really sort of long due attention for her wines, and that's extraordinary, because you're like, all right, well, this is people get it now. So I'm trying to think who else. I mean, there's Dan Petrosky at Massacon, who we talked about. Yep. Who, it's funny, Dan has taken a long time to I think
also a Columbia guy like you.
I swear to God, I am sure that I saw him, because he graduated the year after me. I'm sure I saw him when we were there, and I literally found out about what he was doing because I read the alumni magazine. They're like, Dan Petrosky, is, winemaker out in Napa, and I was like, how is there this dude who clearly I went to school with, who's doing something in Napa that I have no idea about? And so that's what landed him the first story in the Chronicle, in I think 2009. But it was interesting. At that time, he was very hesitant to really talk that much about the scope of what he was doing, because he was making these big called Cabernets by day
for
Larkmead
by day.
And then doing his crazy Italian white wines by night. And we saw him for lunch a few weeks ago, and we were sort of laughing about he He is one of the only people to make wines that like me and Robert Parker and Antonio Galloni all really liked.
Yeah.
And I was like, you have managed the hat trick.
And I think it's also interesting that you had Morgan Twain Peterson and Tegan Pastelacqua as your co-wine. I mean, he has this whole sandwich, but his day job, I mean, they work with Zinfandel, which we thought was the only American varietal, blah, blah, blah. But, I mean, Zinfandel got big in the 90s and the aughts.
Through Turley.
Through Turley.
Which is truly what's fascinating, because you taste the wines that he's now making for Turley. I mean, and there is extraordinary quality, even like the original Helen Turley wines. When she was the first winemaker, like, the sheer quality of the vineyards that Larry and that she picked out have proved themselves over times. And you go back and you can, taste the Hay and Petit Syrah from like 95. And you're like, all right, it's maybe 16, 17% alcohol, but
good. She knew what she was doing.
Yeah.
It works to this day. It's crazy. Yeah.
But it is hilarious now to taste the Turley wines that Tegan makes, because he has managed to take this iconic brand, these iconic sites, and make exactly the wines that he wants to make from them, that are not small, but like Zinfandel is a sugar machine, like, but like you look at the acid chemistry and the pH on them, and you're like, this is, this has more acid than like Burgundy in a cold vintage. But he has managed to completely transform it, and they have not in any way lost their legacy customers, because I think he's just that damn good. Like, he's still making wines that are, to be perfectly fair, like, he's got to please his boss more than anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, they still come in at 14.5, some 15s, but
Larry Turley also is a big fan of big red wine.
Yeah.
So,
he's a
like,
big dude.
Yeah, and so, if you're going to, whatever you choose to do as Larry's winemaker, if he's unhappy with you, you do not have good job security.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's right.
So somehow Tegan has managed to like make wines that please him, make wines that please, sort of weird, nerdy acid head people like me, and rather importantly, like, still please all the people who've loved Turley throughout the years.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, again, like I said, I think it's testament to his extraordinary talent, but it's also just this remarkable threading of the needle, where it's like, this is why people always love Zinfandel and why they still do.
Whenever I don't drink enough Zin, but like whenever I have like a good Dry Creek Zin, you're like, fuck, that's why Zin, like you just the dusty you're like, this is why Zin, and the acid is right. It's like you're like, oh my god, Zinfandel's so fucking good. Like when it's done right. And in addition to being like this maestro of wines, he's a universal life minister.
That's my fault. That is my fault. I was like, who's the most ministerial person I can imagine in my life, when we were planning our wedding, and he was game. So yeah, he graciously, like, went through the extraordinary ministry of signing up online.
Yeah, it was so rigorous. And he married you and your wife Valerie.
Yeah.
And you guys had an interesting relationship because she was on the East Coast and you were on the West Coast.
Yeah.
And
what could go wrong?
What could go wrong? I mean, but like, okay, man, I did my research, so I read the article in the New York Times. Is like, it's a love story, right? And I love love stories. I'm a Cancer, so I love love stories. So, you two both had rough dating stuff, and how'd you meet again? Like, how'd you guys meet?
I don't even remember exactly what was in the vows piece and what wasn't. So we met at we technically met when she was out on the Terry Thies tour.
Right, because she ran that.
She was in charge of she was in charge of selling that portfolio nationwide. And so she was out in San Francisco, where we I wouldn't say connected, but like where we actually got some time to talk with each other was at a Thai restaurant called Lair's Ross, which is on Larkin Street in the Tenderloin, and some of the best Thai food in the country, but also importantly, it's BYO.
Yeah, right. It's all for wine people. It's always about the BYO.
Yeah, and so it was one of like 2 places in San Francisco where we would do all of our wine dinners, and that night, like me and Jasmine Hirsch had arranged a dinner for all of the Thies producers, and so Val was sitting across from me, and I chatted with her, and I thought she was super interesting. There's a finite number of very attractive, insanely smart women in wine. I'm sure many more now than in 2012. But you take notice.
Yeah.
At that point, I just took sort of intellectual notice because I was literally 6 weeks away from getting married. That did not quite come together. My fiance had other thoughts, and super not awkward because we worked together in the same office 8 feet apart. Not a problem at all. It's fine. I adore her. She's doing great. But anyway, so yeah, that sort of fell apart, and then Val was actually back. We still just debate whether she came back that October. I think she did. And it was June originally. But then she definitely was back in San Francisco in January because that's when the winter tour comes through. I may have lingered at her table a little bit longer than I should have. She still claims, she's like, what the fuck is this guy doing? She's like, he knows that I have like other things to do. Like I have other people to talk to, right? I can't just like sit here and like make small talk with him. But anyway, so I finally was
corks, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Did you prefer a waiter's corkscrew or a asso?
Yeah. It's like this straight laser. Tell me more about the Uxla. Tell me all about the Uxla. And so finally I was like, hey, we were chatting, and I was like, yeah, I come to New York a fair amount. I'm from there, and I've got to be there, in March to do my taxes. Not actually bullshit. Like that was my annual pilgrimage to like go see my accountant. And gave me your card, whatever, forgot about it, and I actually reached. I mean, this is in the story.
Like she gave you your card, and like you taped to the refrigerator on the counter, like in Swingers, like don't call her for 7 days.
The funny thing is, I took notice, and then promptly got distracted, and was just doing my thing, and then when I was actually planning my trip, I was like, all right, who do I want to see in New York? I was like, oh yeah, that's. And so sent her an email, and I think this is in the story. Like sent her an email and was like, "Hey, I actually am coming to New York. Would love to have a drink." And it's like I got a couple options, and I swear to God, this was true. This is true. I was like, we could just grab I'd like have dinner with my sister and brother-in-law, and we could like grab a drink after that one night, or Thursday night, I managed to score this reservation at Momofuku Co.
He's like, I got the hottest reservation in town.
Exactly. And if you want to go, that would be cool. That would be all right.
It's on you. I'm gonna go.
Yeah. And legitimately at that point, I did have it. I was like dumb luck, and I was like, all right, well, how I totally didn't plan to actually do this. So, and so she polled everyone in the Skurnik office. She was like, is this a date? Is this not? What's going on? And they were like, well, it's clearly a date. And so she, she's like, yeah, drinks are cool, and let's Coke could be fun. Let's see. And so we had drinks. That was a long date. We had like 4 or 5 places. We met at Amphora. We went to Terroir. And we went to a place called the Beagle, which is closed now, which is like specialized in cherry. Then we went back to Terroir. Boy, like
Paul Greco making
6,
love
7,
connections.
Yeah, exactly. And and then I mean, like we clicked right away, and that was that. And then we had that was Wednesday night. And then the next night was Co. She was obviously at that point, she's like, yeah, I'm in for Co. But not before I had to stop at some crappy bistro on Avenue A and like get the, like, oh, I just, I'm having drinks with my friends. You should come by and meet them. I was like,
Oh,
mhm.
yeah. It was like
Yeah.
she's like, well, I had this out, but now I gotta
Yeah.
go. Yeah, I know the drill. Yeah,
And so, got the scrutiny, seemed to have passed. All of her friends were hungover, so that probably
that
helped.
helps.
And so we had 3 dates and 5 nights, and that was that. And we, just all we had to do was spend the next 3.5 years on airplanes.
Yeah, and then you get married by Tegan Passalacqua in one of the Bedrock Vineyards, right?
In the Bedrock Vineyard, yeah. In the old parcel, yeah.
And the book was already written by then, right?
Yeah, everything.
Okay.
So I forget if there's actually photos of this or not, but because Tegan is Tegan, he actually was holding a copy of the New California Wine, which he had sort of the
Instead of the
vows
Bible.
inside. Yeah, exactly.
Thou shalt marry someone who is hot and wine knowledgeable.
Who has a deep collection of Riesling.
That's such a great story, man. That is such an awesome story. So let's talk about the new wine rules.
Yeah.
Because Book Riot said, Bonne would like you to know that maybe it's okay and not scary to put down that trusty safe glass of Moscato or Chardonnay and try something new. So what was the inspiration behind the new wine rules?
So I had already signed the contract for the new French wine. And I was already,
Okay.
I don't know, a couple years into reporting it. And, this is why I married her. So Val and I were having lunch at Slanted Door in San Francisco. And we were sort of eavesdropping on this table next to us that was like 6 women, maybe late 20s, early 30s, all professional. This is like the financial district. So like they're all, they're able to have like a lunch at Slanted Door. They're doing fine.
Yeah.
And you could hear that like, the waiter kept coming by asking about wine, and they were like interested, but they just like, their server didn't have the ability to like help guide them. They felt like they weren't confident enough to, to sort of, provide enough information to make an informed choice or whatever. We're like, this is ridiculous. This is literally who is going to be the future of the wine industry for the next 30 years. And like, why is this happening? Why is anyone in this position? And so we just started talking about how we felt like all of the sort of basic wine books that are out there, felt like they were about 20 years out of date. There was nothing that was really meeting the wine industry where it was in, I think that was 2017. And so we just sort of started having this conversation. Then I had this conversation again with the head of 10 Speed, and just saying like, why is there no book like this? There's things like the Wine Bible if you want to go through whatever 600 pages. But like if you're just like, I want something that, gives me 2 hours worth, like, give me what I need. And so, I sort of decided to take it as a challenge of like, can I figure out how to do a basic wine book that feels like it actually belongs in the late 2010s, that doesn't patronize people, that is willing to sort of accept the, this new wisdom about relative quality and, orange wine and rosé and, sort of the wiring of like my wine brain, but in a way that's not so completely incomprehensible, including for me. And so I think I looked at other books that sort of worked on similar lines. There's a book actually called 101 Things You Learn at Culinary School. And I was like, it's totally feasible to do a basic book that doesn't feel moronic, that doesn't feel like it's dumbed down and it's sort of talking down to its subjects. And how do we do that with wine? How do we sort of, just strip everything away and talk about just the process of living a wine life. Like I don't need to tell you what Sauvignon Blanc is. And then literally like the benchmark for what went into the book was like, if you can Google it for the most part, I'm not putting it in. and just I'm like, that's again like, like
I love that.
I don't need to duplicate the completely freaking obvious.
Right.
And
I'm not gonna say it about every influencer like Malbec, a great blah 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 blah.
Yeah. So it was that, and then we knew we wanted to be visual. We knew we wanted it to be kind of compact, and it was actually really very easy to write. It was the planning for it. I mean, it was basically storyboarding it out beforehand. But I think it was 17,000 words, which for me is like a single article.
I'm like blown away because I'm like shit. How do you write a fucking book? I'm like, I just can't do it. I'm just too ADD. I'm that's so great, man. That like you can conceptualize and then storyboard it out. And I love that concept because I do IG lives, and even when I interview people here on the podcast, I'm like, I don't want to talk about. You can read the fucking text sheet, so like, why do I need to go into like the cooperage and this and that and rootstock and blah blah blah, So, when you were saying, I was like, before you wrote your first book, who has the gumption? Like, I'm gonna write a book. Like you just go, I'm gonna write a book about that.
So it's funny. Before the New California stuff, like even before the Saveur article, I had this crazy notion that I was going to write a book about natural wine. Ooh. And remember, in like 2008, 2009, natural wine was not what natural wine is now. Like nobody really knew what natural wine was. Like the Muscadet, like that would have been considered like a classic natural wine because it was indigenous fermentations, and but I wanted to talk about how, there was this movement, little did I know, there was this movement that was changing wine, and it was, it was going to become a big deal. And, so I wrote a full proposal for it, probably 45 pages, and had an agent who was not terribly good. He was like, yeah, write your proposal, and like I'll shop it around and see. It's to be fair, it's how a lot of literary agents are. They're like, let me lift my pinky and I'll take 15%. So that went approximately nowhere, and I sort of, I grew a little tired of the book. I moved on, and other stuff was going on in my life, and sort of forgot about it. Probably mercifully, I don't think I would want to be the guy who wrote like a book about natural wine in 2009. But among other things, that also sent me to some folks I knew in publishing, and was like, do you have a recommendation for a good agent? Because I would really like one. So it was literally like, getting connected with my friend Kitty, who's been my agent now for a long time, but is also a good friend, but is also very proactive. And so, I mean, like, how do you write a book? You find someone who's willing to, prod you into writing a proposal, and then we'll take it and, get you some money for it. I mean, it's, I'm constantly mystified. I've somehow managed over the years to find 3 books worth to write about. And after France, I don't know that I want to do another one. It's like, you should do the new German one. You should do the Australian. I'm like, I'm going to do the new nothing, because I'm, I mean, we've cut it down, but like when I turned in the first draft for New French Wine, it was 510,000 words. And so after that, I'm like, mic drop, I'm done. So, it's, but you do, I mean, I constantly struggle, whether it's my books, whether it's other books, when I've judged the Beard Book Awards, this fundamental question of like, what should a wine book be? What value is there? Because you're like, I mean, and this is probably, again, my credentials as an old man are now well established on this podcast. But I look at, I'm like, all right, so, I came up like just literally reading the Oxford Companion to Wine, like entry after entry, and a handful of other things, but like was sort of a staunch traditionalist, and like, sort of the doing the not fun part of wine reading. And now, when I look at a wine book, I'm like, what is the purpose of this book? Like, what is it? What is it? what is it actually trying to share? Because ultimately, I mean, people want to be entertained, but they're reading about wine because they want to know about wine.
Right.
And there's been wine memoirs that have come out that I'm just like, I don't, whose life in wine is interesting enough to deserve a memoir? And there's, a handful. Hugh Johnson's memoir was super interesting because, he'd been doing stuff for 50 years at that point. But you're like, you see a lot and you're like, I don't know who told wine people that they're interesting.
Right.
But we're not interesting. Like, we're truly not interesting people. We sit around and we talk about freaking crushed grapes and, and like glassware, And if anyone thinks that's interesting, like, they're serious reality check.
Oh my God! So, 510,000 words on the new French wine.
Yeah,
and early in the
it's
podcast,
less than that now.
Yeah,
in case my editor's listening, I swear.
And then we talked. You mentioned that you had to revisit Bordeaux a lot. So, shit, this wine is big. Did I ask you what the inspiration? No, I didn't. So what was the inspiration for that book, The New French Wine? What prompted you to
The inspiration for that was a whole lot simpler. So I had written New California, and I was sort of like fumping around trying to figure out, what should I do next? I had this thing for like the new old world, and which was like. It's funny because then Alan Richmond literally, I think, wrote a piece with exactly that title for Esquire, which was definitely not the approach that I would have taken. But I was like, I get it, But conceptually that was sort of in the right place. And then I was literally like at a a natural wine bar in Oakland with my editor Emily, just relatively drunk on Gamay, and she's like, "What about France?" And I'm like, "Sure, let's do that." So moral of this story, like, never agree to a book proposal when you're drunk on Gamay.
Well,
which is, makes me safe because it means I'll never write another book proposal.
I don't know, man. You like when the Fast and Furious came out, do you think there'd be like fucking 10 of those?
Right.
I mean, like, you have a franchise here.
Vin Diesel's like, put me out of my misery.
Exactly. You're like, the new Spanish wine. You are literally, you literally have a franchise. So, in your research for that book, besides Bordeaux, what was some of your most interesting finds in France for you?
So, like I said, Muscadet, and that truly was like, I mean, these were not totally haphazard. In that, I knew I liked Muscadet. I knew I liked sort of the quality changes there. And then I got to the city of Nantes, which is like, it's not small, but it's kind of a second-rank French city, out near the Atlantic at the end of the Loire. And I was blown away. And it's like France's Seattle. It's young. It's a tech city. Like, they have free bike share. They have, like, public art everywhere. All of these young chefs who, like, decided they didn't want to pay Paris rents, opened up neo-bistros there. So there's this insane kind of, like, young, like, well-funded culture there. And they're all supporting the hell out of the local wine, which is Muscadet. And at the same time, like, Muscadet producers are like, well, we're tired of being crappy white wine that's like, €4 a bottle. We want to show that there's better terroir here. And so, like I said, they built the Cru Communaux, which is this system of 10 crus. They really, really sort of changed winemaking, just went on a dramatic quality shift. And so, like, all in all, it blew me away. I was like, I legitimately didn't expect this culture in France. Beaujolais is awesome. I don't know that anything was unexpected, but it is truly a joy to see the quality revolution there. Champagne is truly impressive, but that was much more as like a matter of fact business, a visit. Like I said, Bordeaux blew me away. The Roussillon blew me away. And actually sort of the whole Southwest, like not all of it, but like, seeing what was happening in Gaillac, seeing what was happening up in the mountains in the Aveyron. And this was a region, again, that I was like, I am literally just going to breeze through it, do the absolute bare minimum, and move on. And I was just stunned at how much great wine is coming out of there. And, and it's truly fascinating because the history of the Southwest is directly linked to Bordeaux. And again, speaking about, the sense of entitlement, it is not metaphorically, it is literally called the privilege of Bordeaux. And for about 6 centuries, the Bordelais had shipping rights over anything that was upriver, and they could block literally any wine. That could be Cahors, that could be anywhere like in the Marmande, moving into the Southwest. They could block it from being shipped downriver through the port before Christmas. So obviously Christmas, winter, the port's closed. So the Bordelais had essentially a 3-month advantage to sell their wine to England, the Netherlands, everywhere that would ship out of the Gironde. And so like the major wine trade in France, the Bordelais, like again, like not metaphorically, like just blocked everyone else from trade. And they had, I mean, even when it was Aquitaine, when it was part of England, it was a right granted by the crown that the Bordelais were able to essentially sort of skip paying taxes and could block upriver trade. And so, this is not to say the Southwest didn't have other issues, but one of the reasons that there's so much wine in the Southwest that truly has just never gotten attention, say Bergerac, which, it's never going to be like, the best Margaux, but there's unbelievably good wine in Bergerac that, shows up in the U.S. for under $10 a bottle. So you can imagine when it's leaving the properties at. But it just and that's an interesting one because the soils are so similar to Saint-Emilion, but it's like it's 600 years of oppression by the Bordelais trade.
Jon Bonne espousing critical wine theory here on the Black Wine Guy podcast. That's going to catch on. I guarantee you that one's going to take off.
Just don't send me to Virginia.
So, what about the Languedoc really impressed you? Because I like Languedoc-Roussillon wines. I like a lot of Rhone stuff. What was it?
So Languedoc and Roussillon, I very willfully split for the book.
Okay.
To me, they're two totally different tales.
Okay.
Roussillon is like its own tale. It's somewhat different grapes.
Okay. See, I'm here to learn.
It's much more. It is a very distinctly Catalan influence there.
Okay.
I mean, it's literally called Catalonia No.
Okay.
So, and so they. I won't say they think of themselves in Spanish.
Oh, I've seen some of like Côte de Catalan.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
So the IGP there is Côte Catalan. Yeah,
okay.
exactly. So like they view themselves as Catalonia, and so it's Macabeo. There's Grenache, which was from the history of sweet winemaking or fortified winemaking. There's Carignan, but it's like the style of wine in the Roussillon is very much about like mineral, fresh, like knowing that you're in the South and trying to find freshness there, whereas the Languedoc went through this whole other trajectory where like they thought they were going to be the California of France, and all of these folks wanted to come in and like make cult wines out of Carignan, and put 200% New Oak on it. And so there is extraordinarily interesting wine in the Languedoc, but the Languedoc has this problem of sort of being told that it was going to be the next big thing in the 90s, which did not end well.
Yeah.
But also, if you look at the deeper history, and this is actually the sort of substance of the Languedoc chapter, which starts with me like trying to escape the Gilets jaunes before dawn one morning in Béziers, which is one of the like most insanely right-wing racist cities in France. This is the city where the mayor tried to do you can't actually do censuses by race in France. So the mayor decided that he was going to do a census of every child in Béziers schools by their first name.
It's pretty slick.
Yeah.
That's slick.
So are you Jean-Francois or are you Mohammed?
Yeah.
And so anyway, so it starts with me like getting the hell out of Béziers before dawn because I know that like shit's gonna go down. But it ties back to that actually the Béziers is also the site of where riots were in 1907 over the growers in the Languedoc feeling like basically like the government price supports weren't enough to keep them in business, even though the market had fallen out of bulk wine. And so there's this 100+ year history in the Languedoc of in a very different way of them feeling that the French people and the French government should provide a life for them because they make, real table wine that people drink. And, and so all of the, the terrorism stories that would come out and, people like opening Spanish tankers, all of that was in the Languedoc because there's this long history of really co-ops there believing that, they should be given the right to make wine no matter what.
Damn. That's I'm gonna have to.
Yeah. So it's I mean, yeah, the Languedoc ended up being interesting because it's just there's this. It's sort of a crazy mix of left wing and right wing. Like there is a lot of right wing sort of conservatism there. At the same time, like it was traditionally one of the strongholds of like far left socialism and communism because again, like the co-ops were there and the idea was like, it doesn't matter if you're a crappy farmer, doesn't matter if no one wants your wine, doesn't matter what you grow, doesn't matter what the quality is, like, you're a paysan and you should have the right to, farm your land and have, somehow the government support you for this.
I mean, wine is so fascinating that way. Like you don't have history. Wine is it's our history in a bottle. It's a world's history.
Yeah.
I mean, it's damn, that's fascinating. Okay, I want a signed copy of that book.
We can make that happen.
All right, cool. Very cool, very cool. So you said earlier, like, you grew up and Dad had the catering company and the food and wine and blah blah blah. And you said you really didn't have an aha moment, but was there one bottle of wine that hooked you?
I mean, that's sort of what I mean by there not being an aha moment. Is there have been some extraordinary bottles of wine, but I wouldn't say.
All right, I'll give you a better question.
I'll put it this way: my curiosity has been a bit of a continuum. So, like, there are moments that I'm like, "That's amazing," but there's also moments even when I'm like, "Yeah, that's not amazing," but I'm always looking for things that are.
Favorite bottle of wine you've shared with your wife?
This is for sure not the absolute one, but recently, and it was not just her, it was our friend Osi who lives in London who was visiting Paris. We were all in Paris and drinking. We were on our fourth or fifth bottle of champagne, not going to lie. And the place that we were at is sort of an amazing kind of wine store called 228 Liters up in Pigalle. And one of the proprietors opened a bottle of Savoie wine, so that's Mondeuse, from a producer named Michel Grisard, who's now retired, but it's a Saint Christophe, and this was the wine that like convinced everyone in the Savoie that they could make really serious wine. It was a 2014, which I'm not sure if that was his last vintage or second to last, but it was epic, and you're just like, this is why I do what I do. Here's this wine that like is rubyish, is deep, is structured, but somehow like weightless. It's all the things that like all the freaking speeches about Burgundy, like it was all happening. And it's like here's four of us who are all jaded wine professionals, and we all just had this moment of like, God damn it, like this is why we do what we do. It's like you realize that there are just moments of transcendence that you cannot predict, and that's why, to be perfectly fair, when I see I'm never going to turn down an invitation to like a vertical of Romanée Conti if anyone's listening. But you're like, I understand, like if you've got the money and the will, like you can brute force your way to seeing transcendent beauty in wine. But to me, it's finding those moments that you have literally no idea that it's coming, that it's just around the bend.
Oh my God, Jon, thank you so much for coming here tonight. And
this is awesome. Thank you so much.
Oh, this is so much fun. We'll have to do it again sometime. Tell people where they can find you, how they can be a part of what you're doing, find your next book.
Sure. wouldn't be right if I didn't plug RESY.com, where there's occasional wine stuff from me, but also sort of all the things I do for my day job and all of our terrific writers. Still find me occasionally on punchdrink.com. Take a sip of water. Sorry. If you want to find the books, jonbonne.com or, Amazon, local bookseller, all the places that fine books are sold.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. And till next time, cheers to the Mavericks, the philosophers, the deep thinkers, and all you wine drinkers. It's MJ, your boy. Peace.